This is my true story. I raised 7 sons with my bare hands. I worked. I sacrificed. I gave them everything they ever needed. But when my back grew weak and my body started failing, they decided I was a burden. They dropped me off at a nursing home like I was an old piece of furniture. I watched them drive away, laughing, thinking their duty was done. But what they didn't know was that I wasn't finished. You won't believe what I did next. Before that, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. And please subscribe so my story reaches more people. I worked my whole life for those boys. 7 of them. 7 mouths to feed, 7 pairs of shoes to buy, 7 school fees to pay. I woke up before sunrise, worked until dark, and still came home to fix broken bikes and help with homework. I never bought new clothes for myself. Every dollar I earned went to them. When they were hungry, I fed them first and ate last. When they were sick, I stayed up all night by their beds. When they wanted things I couldn't afford, I found a way anyway. I sold my tools. I skipped meals. I took extra shifts. That's what a father does. When they grew older, I helped each one start his own life. Paid for weddings, down payments, college tuition, and even cars. I didn't keep count. I thought family meant giving without expecting anything back. Every time one of them said, "Don't worry, Dad, we'll take care of you when you're old," I believed them. It was the kind of promise that keeps a man working even when his bones hurt. I built them everything they stood on. The house they grew up in was made from my hands. The money in their bank accounts started from my savings. I wanted them to have what I never did: comfort, stability, pride. I worked through rain, sickness, and pain so they would never feel hunger or fear. When their mother passed, I became both parents. I learned how to cook, how to mend, how to listen. I gave them my life, piece by piece, thinking one day they'd look after me when I couldn't stand anymore. When I retired, I thought I could finally rest. I imagined my sons visiting on weekends, helping me fix the yard, maybe bringing their kids over to play. I imagined Sunday dinners where we'd sit together again like old times. Instead, they started drifting away. Visits became calls, calls became messages, messages became silence. Still, I didn't complain. I told myself they were busy. That's how life goes. I made excuses for their distance because I didn't want to see the truth. I was no longer useful to them. All those years, I thought love was something you earned by sacrifice. I was wrong. To them, my worth ended the day I stopped working. I never asked them for much, just company. A visit now and then, maybe a ride to the doctor. But even that became too much trouble. They said they had their own families, their own lives, their own bills. I understood. I always understood. That was my mistake. The house grew quiet. Days turned into long stretches of silence. I spent birthdays alone. Holidays passed without a single call. I used to sit by the window, waiting to see one of their cars pull up. None ever did. The neighbors would ask if my boys were coming by, and I'd smile and lie. They're busy, but they'll visit soon. Deep down, I knew they wouldn't. I still sent them gifts. Still helped when they called for money. They always found time when they needed something. One wanted help with a mortgage, another needed a business loan. I said yes every time. I told myself it was love, but it wasn't love. It was convenience. Years passed like that, until the day they decided I was too old to live alone. That's when everything changed. It happened on a Tuesday. My oldest son said they wanted to visit me together. All 7 showed up at once, something they hadn't done in years. They smiled too much, talked too politely, acted like they cared. I should have known something was wrong. They told me it was time for me to rest, that I needed care and comfort. They said they found a nice place for me. I thought they meant a small apartment, maybe near one of their homes. I didn't understand what they were really saying until we got in the car. They drove for almost 2 hours without telling me where we were going. When the car stopped, I saw a sign that said Maple Grove Nursing Center. I asked what we were doing there, but no one answered. They got out, opened the trunk, and started unloading my bags. I didn't even remember packing. My clothes, my medicine, my slippers. Everything was already there. That's when I realized they had planned this. Not one of them looked me in the eye. They handed the nurse some papers, said a few words, and turned to leave. No hugs, No real goodbyes. Just quick waves and fake smiles. I watched from the doorway as they walked back to the car. My second son checked his phone. The third was laughing about something. My youngest didn't even turn around. They drove off like they were free. Free from the man who fed them, clothed them, and carried them through life. The door shut behind me, and it felt final, like a chapter closing that I didn't get to finish writing. The nurse showed me to a small room with a single bed and a TV. She said, "You'll get used to it." I nodded, but my chest felt hollow. The walls were blank, the air smelled of bleach, and the halls echoed with people coughing or crying. Every sound reminded me I didn't belong here. I wasn't sick, I wasn't dying, I was just unwanted. That first night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling and thought about each of my sons. The times I carried them on my shoulders, the nights I stayed up fixing broken toys, the meals I skipped so they could eat. I thought about their weddings, how proud I felt walking them down the aisle. I wondered how a man could raise 7 sons and still end up alone in a place where strangers had to help him out of bed. The next morning, the nurse asked if my family would visit soon. I said yes, even though I knew they wouldn't. She smiled kindly, the way people do when they feel sorry for you. I didn't want her pity. I wanted my family. But that word didn't mean much anymore. Days passed. I kept waiting for a call, a visit, a letter, something. Nothing came. The phone in the hall never rang for me. I started watching the door every evening when visiting hours started. Other families came. Sons, daughters, grandchildren bringing flowers and food. My room stayed empty. By the second week, I understood the truth. They didn't put me there because they cared about my health. They put me there because it was easier, because I was no longer useful. I was an old man who had outlived his purpose. I wasn't angry, not yet. I was just tired. Tired of believing that love automatically comes back to you when you've given it your whole life. Tired of pretending that blood means loyalty. I realized then that if they wanted me gone, I'd give them what they wanted, but on my terms. That's when I stopped waiting for their calls. I stopped hoping. I started thinking. The first few weeks inside that place felt like slow death. Every day was the same. The lights came on at 6 in the morning, nurses brought pills, then breakfast trays rolled down the hallway. Most of the people there were quiet. Some talked to themselves, some stared at walls, some cried without sound. I sat by the window and watched cars pass outside. Every one of them reminded me of my sons, the cars I helped them buy, the engines I fixed, the rides we used to take together. Now they drove freely through life while I sat here, forgotten. At first I told myself they'd call. Maybe they just needed time to adjust, maybe they felt guilty. I even kept my phone charged beside the bed. I waited every evening, hoping for one ring, one message, one voice saying, "Dad, how are you?" But the phone stayed silent. The only sounds came from nurses' shoes on the floor and the TV down the hall. By the third week, the staff stopped asking if anyone was coming for me. They knew the answer. "Your family's busy," they said kindly. I nodded each time, pretending it didn't bother me. But inside, it hurt worse than anything I'd ever felt. Not because I was lonely, because I finally knew where I stood in their lives. I was something they used until they didn't need it anymore. I started noticing how the other residents lived. Some had visitors every day, sons bringing soup, daughters reading books aloud, grandkids running in with balloons. They had laughter, conversation, touch. I had none of that. My meals were quiet. My evenings were silent. My nights were long. I stared at the clock until my eyes burned. Once, a nurse mentioned that my sons had signed off on all the bills using my own account. I didn't say anything. I just nodded. They were still using my money while leaving me here. That night, I couldn't sleep. I realized I had worked my entire life so that they could live comfortably, and in return, they had taken the last bit of dignity I had left. One afternoon, I went to the recreation room. A few old men were playing cards. They talked about their kids, how one daughter called every morning, how one son took him fishing last week. I smiled like I related, but I didn't. I hadn't seen any of mine since the day they left me at the door. When the mail cart came, I still checked. Bills, junk, and pamphlets. Never a letter from them. Not once. So I made a decision. If they were going to forget me, I'd make sure they remembered me in a way they'd never forget again. I didn't know exactly what that meant yet, but I felt it. A quiet strength I hadn't felt in years. The kind that doesn't shout or fight, but plans. Every night before bed, I went through my memories. Each face, each moment, each lie. I didn't cry. I didn't curse. I just remembered. Because remembering meant I was still alive. And if I was still alive, I still had control. The nurses started to like me. They said I was polite, patient, calm. I thanked them every time they helped me. I talked to the janitor, to the cook, to the man who fixed the air conditioning. They were kind, kinder than my own sons. I listened to their stories, learned their names, and never complained. The staff didn't know it, but every conversation mattered. Every small detail I learned would soon play a part in what I was building quietly inside my head. I wasn't just waiting anymore. I was preparing. My sons thought they were smart. They thought signing a few papers and leaving me in a nursing home meant they owned everything I worked for. They didn't even bother to read what they signed. They just assumed they were in control because I was old. That was their mistake. They bragged to relatives that I had handed them my money and properties. They told people they handled my estate. They lied to make themselves look important. What they didn't know was that every account, every house, every piece of land still had my name on it. I never gave away ownership. I only let them think I did. Years ago, when my wife was sick, I had my lawyer set up a special clause in my financial documents. It said that if I ever became mentally unfit, control of my estate would transfer to a trust managed by me until my death. No one could access it without proof of my passing. My sons never knew about that clause. They only saw surface papers and thought they were final. They told everyone they took care of the finances, but they never once went to the courthouse or the bank to verify. They lived off assumptions and greed. Even the house they called theirs was still mine legally. The title was never transferred. They had fake copies made to look official, but real records don't lie. My lawyer kept every original document in his safe, and the bank statements went to a P.O. box they didn't know existed. While they laughed about spending Dad's money, I was still the only one signing the checks. The nurses didn't know any of this. To them, I was just another old man with kids who forgot him. That's what made it easy to stay quiet. I let everyone believe I was powerless. I wanted my sons to think I was fading, losing track, running out of time. Because when greedy people think you're weak, they stop being careful. They talk more, they brag more, and they reveal everything. One day, I overheard a nurse talking on the phone. She said one of my sons called to check on the account. That told me everything. They weren't worried about me. They were worried about the money. I smiled. They didn't know I had already moved most of it into another account months before they dropped me off. A private account, one only I could access. They missed the truth sitting right in front of them. The truth that I wasn't helpless. That I had spent my life learning how the world works, how money moves, how documents protect, how signatures mean more than promises. I had built companies, bought property, and survived recessions. I wasn't some fool they could trick with fake affection and printed lies. Every time they posted family photos online pretending to care, I made notes. Every time one of them called the staff asking about my health, I asked for a copy of the report. I built a file on each of them. Not for revenge yet, but for proof. I wanted evidence of how fast people can forget where they came from when money's involved. They thought they had taken everything from me, but they never checked the foundation. The same foundation I built for them. I kept that locked in my own hands. My assets were untouchable. My lawyer had instructions for exactly what would happen if I died, and none of those instructions included their names. They thought they were waiting for an inheritance. They were actually waiting for their own lesson. The idea came to me one night while I was lying in bed staring at the ceiling. I realized I didn't need to confront them. I didn't need to yell, argue, or beg for respect. That never works on people who only see money. The best way to deal with greed is to feed it, until it eats itself. So I decided to make them believe what they already wanted to believe, that I was dying and that my will was being prepared. It wasn't a lie. I just didn't tell them the full truth. The next morning, I asked one of the nurses to call my doctor and schedule a final review. I made sure it sounded serious enough to spread through the staff. In a place like that, news travels fast. Within 2 days, everyone thought I didn't have much time left. The whispers started. Poor Mr. Collins isn't doing well. I made sure to nod weakly whenever someone asked how I was feeling. The performance wasn't hard. Old age already makes you look fragile. I told the staff to call my sons and let them know my health was declining. I gave permission for them to visit while they still could. I knew how they would react. They wouldn't come out of love. They would come for what they thought I was leaving behind. And that's exactly what I needed. During those days, I kept to myself, moving slower, talking less, acting tired. Every nurse, every resident believed the story. My sons didn't visit right away, but I knew they would. People like them always show up when money's on the line. It took a week, then another. On the 12th day, I got the first call. My oldest son asked the nurse if I was stable enough to talk. He didn't ask how I felt, just if I was still breathing. That told me everything. After that, I called my lawyer. I told him exactly what to do, to prepare a will, one that looked normal but had a twist. The kind that would only reveal itself at the end. We wrote it together over the phone, line by line. It left nothing to my sons, not $1. Everything would go to the nursing home staff, the maintenance team, and a local scholarship fund. People who had been kind when my family wasn't. But the key part was this. The will wouldn't be read until after a public announcement of my death. Once it was ready, I started spreading a little more news. Small hints that the lawyer had been by, that papers were being signed. I wanted them to smell the money before realizing it wasn't theirs. I let the home staff share those details. They didn't know it was part of the plan. As the rumor grew, my sons started calling more often. They asked questions that sounded caring, but every sentence had the same hidden motive. "Are you eating okay?" really meant, "How much longer do we have to wait?" I could hear it in their tone. I could almost see them calculating what they'd gain. Every time I hung up, I smiled. They thought I was slipping away. In reality, I was sharper than ever. I spent those days writing letters, preparing documents, and setting up everything exactly how I wanted. I wasn't planning revenge for pain. I was planning justice for betrayal. The staff began to treat me like family. They'd bring me warm meals, check in after hours, sometimes even sit and talk when they weren't supposed to. They didn't do it for money. They did it out of kindness. That's when I knew they were the ones who deserved something real. By the time my sons finally decided to visit, everything was in motion. All I had to do was wait for the show to begin. It started slow. One phone call, then another. My oldest son said he wanted to see me before it was too late. Within days, all 7 of them were suddenly family again. They arrived one by one, pretending it was love, but reeking of greed. They brought flowers, cameras, and fake tears. They hugged too long, spoke too softly, and made sure the nurses were watching. They weren't visiting me. They were auditioning for my will. Every conversation started the same way, about my health, then shifted to my accounts, my house, my savings. They asked if I'd taken care of things legally. I told them yes, and that was all they needed to hear. Soon, they began to compete with each other. One would bring my favorite soup, another would bring a blanket, another would take photos of himself, spending time with Dad. It was a performance, and I was the stage. They thought they were winning me over. I let them. I even pretended to forget details, to act a little slower, to look weaker than I was. Every time one of them left, I made sure the staff praised them. I wanted them to think I was easily influenced. The hungrier they got, the better my plan worked. By the second week, they were already talking about who would get what. I could hear them whispering in the hallway, thinking I was asleep. One said he wanted the house. Another said he'd take the rental property. One even joked about selling the farm equipment. They thought the inheritance was a game of who could fake love better. None of them knew I had already signed every asset away to people who actually earned it. The staff noticed the sudden change too. The same sons who hadn't visited in months were now showing up with expensive watches and loud laughter. One nurse pulled me aside and said, "It's nice to see your family caring again." I smiled and said nothing. I wasn't going to ruin the show. They were doing exactly what I wanted, showing their true faces in front of witnesses. They stayed longer each day. They began talking about funeral arrangements, how it should be done, what kind of service I'd want. They even started drafting a list of names for invitations. I listened quietly, nodding as if I approved. In their minds, I was already gone. That's how sure they were that death was near, and that money was next. I started making small requests, testing them. I'd ask one to pick up a prescription, another to fix something in my room. None of them did. But if I mentioned the lawyer was coming by, all 7 showed up in minutes. They were vultures circling, waiting for their turn to feed. On the last day before the announcement, I sat in my chair and watched them all sitting around me, pretending to be united. They smiled for photos, made speeches about family, and recorded every moment like they were heroes. I almost laughed. The world loves a good act, but this wasn't acting anymore. It was exposure. They didn't realize the lawyer standing in the corner wasn't there to collect signatures. He was there to witness the moment for the record. Every visit, every word, every lie was documented. The people who once thought I was an old fool had walked straight into my lesson. By the time evening came, I was tired. Not from age, but from pretending to be fragile for so long. I looked at them all, smiling and celebrating like winners, and I thought to myself, tomorrow, everything changes. The morning after, the rumor spread fast. Dad passed away. I didn't say it, but I didn't stop it either. The nursing home staff made calls, following the list I'd given them earlier. Each of my sons was told the same thing. He went peacefully. I had already arranged it with my lawyer. The paperwork, the timing, the announcement. Everything had been planned for weeks. I wasn't dead, but the world believed I was. That was all I needed. I wanted to see what kind of men my sons had become when they thought there was no one left to watch. By afternoon, they started arriving one by one. The first came in a new suit, pretending to wipe away tears. The second brought flowers, but handed them to a nurse instead of the bed. The third came with his wife and a camera crew from his friend's media company. He said he wanted to capture memories. The rest followed, each one looking more like an actor than a son. They didn't come for closure, they came for inheritance. The funeral was exactly what I expected. They rented a hall, ordered expensive decorations, and hired people to sing hymns they never remembered me liking. They wanted the world to see how devoted they were. Cameras flashed, reporters showed up, and people from town came to watch. My sons made speeches about love, sacrifice, and what a great father I was. I listened from the back room through a small speaker my lawyer had arranged. Every word felt empty. They weren't mourning me. They were performing for the crowd, already counting what they thought they were about to receive. Their wives cried loudly for attention. Their children looked confused. The whole thing felt like a play. They even argued about who should sit in the front row. My oldest claimed he deserved it because he was firstborn. My youngest said he was closest to me. In truth, none of them were close, not in years, not in heart. I let them fight. That argument was just the beginning of what they truly deserved. The lawyer stood quietly through it all. He had the real documents, the will, the statements, the proof that everything they thought was theirs wasn't. I had told him exactly when to reveal it. But not yet. I wanted them to reach the peak of their greed first. So he waited until after the service, when they gathered around the front table, smiling, shaking hands, pretending to console one another. That's when he stepped forward. He thanked everyone for coming, then announced that, as per my request, the will would be read publicly. My sons looked pleased. They stood taller, fixed their jackets, and got ready to hear their names attached to wealth. I could almost see them rehearsing their reactions in their heads, the fake tears, the solemn nods, the words of gratitude. As the lawyer began reading, their expressions shifted. Slowly, their smiles started to fade. The first few lines spoke about kindness, about loyalty, about how real family isn't always blood. Then came the part they didn't expect, the list of names. Not one of my sons was mentioned. Instead, every penny, every property, every asset was left to the staff who had cared for me, to the janitor who fixed my room heater, to the nurse who checked on me every night. The rest went to a fund for elderly residents who had no family. The room went silent. Cameras stopped clicking. Every son stared at each other, waiting for someone to say it was a joke. But it wasn't. It was legal, signed, sealed, witnessed. They had thrown me away, and now they had to live with the cost of it. And then came the final moment, the one that made them truly break. My lawyer pressed play on a small screen beside the podium. The video started. It was me, alive, sitting in that same nursing home chair, looking straight into the camera. "If you're hearing this," I said, "it means you finally showed up. Too bad it's too late." That was the moment the room fell apart. The silence after that video was louder than any shouting could have been. My sons froze. Some turned white, some red. Some just stared blankly, like their minds couldn't process what they saw. I sat watching the live feed from a quiet room at the nursing home, next to my lawyer. He had set up the stream so I could see everything. My 7 sons, the same men who once fought for my attention, now stood in a hall filled with people, exposed, humiliated, and lost. The lawyer paused the video and read the next section of the will. It said that my sons had been observed neglecting and abandoning their father, that their actions had been documented by staff, and that they had forfeited all inheritance under the family neglect clause. It was all legal, airtight, signed years ago when their mother was still alive. I had created that clause at her request. She said, "If they ever forget you, make sure they remember what it costs." I did exactly that. One of my sons tried to protest. He stood up, shouting that it was fake, that it wasn't valid. But the lawyer calmly showed the signatures, the dates, and the witnesses. He even played audio recordings of their calls to the nursing home. Short, careless conversations where they asked more about my account balances than my health. Every bit of evidence came from their own mouths. The same mouths that called me a burden. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Neighbors, friends, people from church. They all stared at my sons differently now. The same men who wanted the world to see them as loyal sons were now revealed as selfish, greedy, and heartless. Their wives looked down, embarrassed. Even their children turned away. Every lie they built collapsed in minutes. The lawyer continued reading. "To the Maple Grove Nursing Center and its staff," he said, "I leave my gratitude and full payment for care rendered." He named each person who had shown me kindness: the cook who gave me extra pudding, the janitor who fixed my light, the nurse who stayed late when I couldn't sleep. Each received a sum of money, enough to change their lives. The rest of my estate was divided into a community trust for elderly residents who had been abandoned by family. My name would stay on that trust forever. Then the lawyer read one final part, the clause about my son's debts. Years earlier, when they borrowed money for homes and businesses, I had co-signed those loans. After they left me, I quietly revoked every guarantee. That meant all their debts were now fully in their names. No co-signer, no backup. The banks had already been notified. By the time they walked out of that hall, their payments would double. Their credit lines would vanish. Their businesses would sink. The lawyer handed them each an envelope. Inside was a letter, short, cold, and final. It said, "You left me in a nursing home to die. I left you with exactly what you gave me. Nothing." People started leaving the hall. No one clapped, no one spoke. My sons just stood there, surrounded by empty chairs and fading music. One of them tried to call my phone, but I had already changed the number. Another sent an email to my lawyer, begging for a second chance. It bounced back automatically. Back at the nursing home, I turned off the live feed. I didn't need to watch anymore. I had seen enough. I felt no joy, no anger, just closure. The kind that doesn't come from revenge, but from finally being seen for who you are, not what you can give. The lawyer looked at me and asked if I wanted to issue a statement. I said no. They already heard everything that needed to be said. By the next morning, the story had spread everywhere. People in town couldn't stop talking about it. My sons couldn't show their faces without whispers following them. For the first time, I didn't feel like the forgotten father. I felt like the one who finally finished what they started. The days that followed were chaos for them. I didn't have to see it to know. The lawyer kept me informed. Banks froze their accounts almost immediately. Every joint asset they had built under my guarantees was suddenly unstable. The houses they bragged about owning had unpaid loans under my co-signature. The businesses they flaunted were built on money that was never really theirs. Without my name behind them, everything started to crumble. The oldest son called the bank, trying to reverse the decision. They told him the cosigner had withdrawn authorization months ago. He demanded answers, shouted, threatened legal action, but it didn't matter. The paperwork was final. The second son's business partner pulled out within a week, leaving him with unpaid bills and angry clients. The third son had used my credit score to lease 2 luxury cars, both repossessed by the end of the month. The rest tried to sell assets to recover something, but nobody wanted to buy from men who had become local gossip. The news of the will spread through town like wildfire. People whispered at grocery stores and gas stations. Those 7 sons threw their father in a nursing home for money, they said. And he got the last word. Every door that once opened for them now stayed shut. Business partners stopped calling. Neighbors stopped waving. Their wives avoided eye contact in public. The shame was heavy, and for once, it wasn't mine to carry. Some of them came to the nursing home gate, begging for a visit. The staff had orders. No visitors allowed unless approved in writing. I never approved a single one. They left flowers, letters, apologies written on paper that still smelled of guilt. I didn't read them. I told the nurses to donate everything to the other residents. The same sons who left me in a hallway now stood outside mine, powerless. Within 2 months, everything they owned started to disappear. Cars gone. Houses sold at losses. Bank accounts drained to pay debts. Their pride, the thing that made them forget me, was finally broken. They blamed each other, fought over who was responsible. Brothers who once stood together in greed now turned on each other in anger. They destroyed each other faster than I ever could have. One afternoon, the lawyer brought me updates. He said the third son declared bankruptcy, the fifth lost his home, and the youngest moved to another state. He looked at me and asked if I wanted to stop it, to give them something, maybe just one chance. I said no. They made their choice the day they drove away from me. I wasn't punishing them anymore. I was just done saving them. At the nursing home, I continued living quietly. I ate meals with the staff, helped the janitor fix broken lamps, even taught one of the nurse's sons how to balance a checkbook. The people who once served me now felt like real family. They cared. Not for money, not for inheritance, but for the simple reason that kindness still mattered to them. I left them small envelopes sometimes, not full of cash, but enough to show gratitude. I wanted them to know the world still had good in it. Meanwhile, my sons kept falling. One tried to sue the lawyer, but every document was legitimate. Another tried to appeal in court, only to find the trust locked airtight. A few even turned on their own families, claiming their wives influenced them. But none of them blamed themselves. That was their biggest curse, never learning responsibility. Every night, I sat by the window and watched the sunset over the nursing home courtyard. I thought about everything I lost and everything I gained. They took my freedom once, but I took back my dignity forever. They forgot who I was. I reminded them without saying a single word. When everything was over, when the noise and anger finally faded, I found peace in the same place they left me. The nursing home that once felt like a prison now felt like freedom. No shouting, no lies, no footsteps full of greed, just quiet. I woke up every morning to the sound of birds outside my window and the nurses laughing in the hallway. They treated me like a person, not a burden. For the first time in years, I felt wanted again. Not because of money, but because of who I was. I started walking again, slow but steady, through the garden behind the building. The air was clean, and the sunlight didn't hurt anymore. The staff would join me sometimes, asking about my life, about the 7 boys I raised. I told them the truth. I gave them everything, and they gave me nothing back. But I didn't speak with bitterness. I spoke like a man who had survived something and learned what truly matters. The lawyer still came by once a month to check on me. He said people were still talking about what happened. My story had spread far beyond this town. Some called me cruel, others called me wise. I didn't care what they called me. The only people whose opinions ever mattered were the ones who showed up when I had nothing left. And none of those were my sons. Occasionally, I received letters from them. Some were apologies, some were excuses, some were just blank envelopes with no words at all. I never opened a single one. The past doesn't deserve space in a peaceful life. I had already buried it the day they buried me in their lies. The nursing home became my home, my real one. I paid for upgrades, new furniture, better food for everyone. I used the money they thought was theirs to make life better for people who actually deserved comfort. The janitor got a car. The nurse went back to school. The cook opened her own small diner. They all said I changed their lives, but the truth is, they changed mine. Sometimes I sit outside in the evening and watch the sky turn orange. I think about the house I built, the sons I raised, the years I spent working for a family that forgot me. I don't feel regret anymore. I did what I had to do. I taught them a lesson they could never learn from kindness. They wanted my money. They got my silence. They wanted my death. They got my truth. I live quietly now. I don't need much. Just a cup of coffee in the morning, a walk in the afternoon, and peace at night. No expectations, no disappointments, no more pretending. The staff calls me Grandpa. It feels strange, but it's the first time in years that word has sounded warm. When I look back at my life, I see one clear lesson. Love isn't proven by words or family titles. It's proven by how people treat you when they think you can't give them anything anymore. My sons failed that test. The people in this home passed it every day without even knowing there was a test. One day, I'll be gone for real. There won't be a fake funeral next time, just a quiet goodbye. But this time, I know I'll leave something that matters. Not money, but meaning. My will is final, my peace complete, and my heart no longer heavy. Final thought. They left me in a nursing home to die. So I gave them a funeral, and then I gave myself peace. The difference is, they lost everything, and I found everything I needed.